Welcome to What No One Knows, the podcast that tells the secret behind the published books, hosted by Lisa Marie Garcia, the Chief Operating Officer of Now Publishing, a full-service book publishing and author PR firm. Through the years in the publishing industry, we've heard the statement over and over, "This is what no one knows," when we interview would-be authors wishing to tell their story. This is what this podcast is all about. And now to our podcast and our host, Lisa Marie Garcia.
Hello again, listeners, and welcome back to What No One Knows. I'm so excited about this morning's podcast. We have with us, before I say his name, I'm just going to tell you a little about him. Well, he's a TEDx speaker. He's a 3-time nonprofit CEO. He's recognized as an industry influencer and is just an amazing professional in spreading leadership for a topic that's not commonly discussed. So I'd like us to welcome Mr. Ian ADAIR to What No One Knows. Hello, Ian. How are you?
How are you doing, Lisa? Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
It's going to be a great show. I'm so excited that more than our team at Now Publishing can have a chance to talk to you and hear what you have to say. So thank you for being on What No One Knows. Well, I'd like to start with, as I mentioned in the intro, the topic that has been your profession for a number of years now, having to do with mental health. And in some very specific ways, I believe that what you have to say has some differences in what some people have studied and read and listened to and watched when we do divulge into that topic. So if you would, I'd like to just maybe start at the top, and I'd like to get your perspective for our listeners on the status of what you believe the status is of mental health today.
Wow, it's a constantly evolving question and answer, but mental health, I believe, is getting easier to talk about. And I think there's several reasons for that. I think mental health is constantly trending on social media, so that helps open the door and keep the discussion going. I think more professional athletes and more musicians and artists and celebrities are talking more openly about their battles and challenges they've had with mental health issues and addiction. So that helps as well. But I think as much as that has helped keep the discussion going on social platforms, I still think that's having a tougher time kind of trickling down to everyday people with everyday jobs that don't have large social followings or paparazzi following them or a large audience. I think most people still struggle with discussing and disclosing issues with their mental health or addiction.
Do you think that it's beneficial for us to hear about, watch about, read about other people's stories? Do you think there's a positive side? Do you think there's a negative side? What's your take on that?
I think stories help. I think stories change the narrative. I think for the longest time, we didn't know how to talk about mental health. And sadly, the only times we talked about it, and sadly, the only times that we've been talking about it the last 4 or 5 years, usually are after something tragic has happened, like a high profile death by suicide or a mass shooting, or numbers that we see with increased issues with addiction, especially in young people. So that has kind of changed the narrative a little bit, but I think storytelling has actually helped support mental health and why it's so powerful to tell stories, because I think sometimes it takes the story of another to give us the air cover we need to share our own story, or to feel like we're not alone, or kind of push us in the direction of getting help for the first time.
I love that. I love that air cover. So at Now Publishing, right, one of the things we love about having authors go ahead and lay out their story on paper, and then our ability to publish it, is that we feel like the cover for them, right, is that, yes, their name is in the byline, but they're not, right out on video, on audio in front of us, in terms of the full reveal is not being seen there. They're hidden sometimes in the pages, right, and in the words. So I love that. I think the air cover that you talk about, or cover in general that you talk about, I do believe that once stories are revealed, people take some bravery from that as well. So agree with you 100% on that. Before we get into how you are sharing your message and sharing some stories, which we will get to your upcoming book, Stronger Than Stigma, I wanted to ask you, with your work at Grace Point, if you'll talk a little bit about that and what you do there as executive director. How has this pandemic been shaken the Grace Point Wellness team and your team, and how have you been able to be nimble during these times?
I tell you, it's been difficult, and like I kind of said before, things are constantly evolving. I think at Grace Point, first and foremost, as the executive director of the foundation, it's my job to tell all the amazing stories of what we do here, and we're very much known in the Tampa Bay area as the behavioral health emergency room for Hillsborough County, but we do serve some other outlying counties as well. We're serving about 30,000 plus people each year, children and adults, both inpatient and outpatient mental health services, addiction services, and homeless services. So we do a lot here. We're a large organization. The foundation is the philanthropic arm of Grace Point. So our job is to really get the message that how important mental health is, talk about mental health education, talk about mental health awareness, let people know that it's a priority for a lot of people, especially a lot of the younger people in the workforce today. And so organizations need to keep it top of mind. Since the pandemic started, we've had to pivot a lot. We were probably running at about 15% telehealth, telemedicine for our outpatient counseling services for the population we serve. And we had to, in a very short period of time, transition to 100% telehealth because of all the people who were social distancing and quarantine and isolating themselves because of fear of COVID-19.
That's a big jump, right? And the telehealth and the whole medical history. In fact, even in my family, we have a telehealth appointment coming up. Just signs of what progressed fast, more rapidly during this to tech. And honestly, I'm all for it. I think that there's a lot of benefits that wasn't necessarily taken full advantage of in the healthcare industry. And I can speak to that because my tech company was very entrenched in healthcare through the nation for about 5 years. And it seemed to be an industry that was lagging a little bit behind in terms of what we know for end user tech, right? Not necessarily for medicine. So that's great news. And Grace Point does has a big impact in our community here in Tampa Bay for many years, 70 years, right? Around 70 years, is that right?
Just over 70 years. We were actually formed the same time Congress passed that we were going to celebrate May as Mental Health Awareness Month just 71 years ago. So it seems like, you can only be the best kept secret in town for so long. I like to jest a little bit about that. But now that I think mental health's become a lot easier to talk about and a lot easier, I think, to get help, and you weren't really looking as hard as you used to before. We've seen definitely an uptake in our population that we serve. But that's what we're here for. And that's what we do each and every day. And we have some amazing people in our inpatient, outpatient, and outreach service groups that do some incredible work in our community.
Yes, for sure. I'd like to segue here and talk about your upcoming book, Stronger Than Stigma. The title is based on an event that will happen next year as far as the Stronger Than Stigma event, I believe. I would like to talk at the end of the podcast about the event that is coming up involving socks. But before we get to that, can you explain a little bit high level about the focus of Stronger Than Stigma? And then secondly, I'd like to ask the question about how difficult was it for you to get the stories that are in your book, talk to the authors and asking them to become fully transparent and reveal what has happened in their lives?
Right. It's, the book came out of the success of the event you mentioned. The event is Stronger Than Stigma. And we started it a couple years ago. And we found that even though we always look for, like any nonprofit organization, you're always looking for a powerful keynote speaker or somebody with a large social following, kind of a hook to get people to show up. We found that the secret sauce of this event had to do with the personal stories being shared by people locally that most of the people in the room had either had known to some level or some degree, or at least heard of, because since it's happening in your own backyard, you felt more impacted by it. And we decided to take that awareness for what we realized people actually wanted and make a book out of it. And that kind of led us to, all right, we got to find the right group of what I call storytellers. And we got to find people that are comfortable and in a good place in their healing and recovery to feel open enough to share some of the things that have happened to them, some of the ways that they used that helped with their recovery or their path to wellness, as we call it. And then the third component of each story is the call to action, which I think is strongly felt by a lot of people who, once they get to a certain level to where they feel they can talk about what's happened to them, they always have a little bit of an itch in the back of their mind that they want to get involved in some way and just don't know how to do it. And that's what this book will really help that group of people see some interesting ways and some innovative ways that people have turned their tragedy and their profound grief and loss into action. And so that's exciting that we were able to find the right fit of people to do that. So, it was difficult. We have some people that have really experienced some stuff, and we wanted to be respectful of what they've been through and make sure that if we told their story, it was done in a way that they were comfortable with, and that they were going to be okay with somebody else telling their story. And so once you kind of work out who the right people are, it really kind of took off after that. And we've been excited about just the array of stories and things that are shared that I think will reach a lot of people.
Agree. And because I've been privy to be able to read the book, I have to say it's inspiring in a way that you wouldn't expect. Definitely, there's parts of the book that are hard to read and hard to get through. But as you said, with the complete reveal comes with the inspiration that comes from the author. There's a section that I liked. One of the stories says something like this. He says that he was worried about what people would say, how they would respond when they opened up. But he said all he returned in return was support and understanding, and learned that many people are suffering in some way, some of them addiction, mental health. But the more that he started talking about what was going on, the burden started to lift. And I think that's where it's at. I mean, time, we all know, time needs to transpire to help with harm and with hurt and with grief, right? So that time, but I think that the time can be less burdensome, like you said, as you're able to confide in some way, whether it's writing, right?
Right. I think that passage you read too is so important, and I'm so glad you did. I think for most of us, it's different for athletes and it's different for celebrities, but for most of us, for everybody else, it's hard, and we have that fear of disclosing. It's always hard anytime you talk about trauma or you share what that is to the outside world. But for the rest of us, we really do fear three things when we talk about our mental health or an issue with addiction, and that is losing the three things that are closest to us, and that's our family, our friends, and our job. And I think for all of these folks that are shared in this book and all the stories that are shared, we're showing that that's a fear across the board that everyone has. And what most people found was empathy and support. And no one thinks about that right away when they're experiencing something, because we all internalize it. And that was a great passage to demonstrate what a majority of the people that are featured in the book ended up really feeling and discovering afterwards.
Yes, they did. All right. Well, we've come to our question. So the name of this podcast, as you know, Ian, is What No One Knows. So I want to ask you that question, and I want to ask you to share either something about you or maybe something that didn't make the book, just something that maybe no one knows that you can share with our listeners for the show.
Wow, what no one knows. It's It sounds like a great setup question. I could get in
Am I
trouble.
putting you on the spot?